Hey guys, tonight we are diving into the heart of a time long past, weaving through the legendary streets of Victorian London at its peak. Picture this: heavy fog rolls in like a woolen blanket, clinging tightly to cobblestones and chimneys alike. The air is thick with the gritty taste of coal smoke, while nearby, carriages creak and rumble, their wheels splattered with the dreariness of the day. You probably won't survive this. The sights and sounds of yesteryear are not for the faint of heart. And so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Victorian London awaits, shrouded in its ever-present misty grey. As you trudge along, the fog hugs you closely, a clandestine companion on the slick streets. This is London swathed in the hues of an old black and white film, though perhaps a bit more smudged. Cobblestones glisten underfoot, faint whispers of morning dew mixing ominously with soot. The skies above mirror the melancholy below, covered in a uniform palette of soft grays, an artist's modest brushwork without any hint of sunshine or blue, as if the weather itself decided to be understated today. The fog does you no favors when it comes to understanding your surroundings. Peek through its murkiness, and you might catch fleeting glimpses: a lady in crinolines hastily stepping from a hansom cab, her parasol bumping awkwardly against the door, or maybe the hiccupy whistle of a train disappears somewhere in the distance. Yet, extraordinarily, this grey city isn't one of shadow and silence. No, the fog only amplifies the thrum of urban life. Much like today's bustling metropolises, these streets form arteries pulsating with the city's lifeblood, where all social classes, from the silk hats of the gentry to the humble caps of the laborer, mingle, if only for a moment, before society's rigid divisions reassert themselves. Think of it as the ultimate street theater, albeit performed in a constant state of shadow puppetry. As you move further into the maze, you learn it's not just the fog and smoke that define this landscape. Gas lamps flicker nervously through the haze, marking pathways like spectral sentinels keeping watch over the cobbled roadways. These are your beacons in the drear, reminiscent of black pearls strung along invisible threads. What seems quaintly Dickensian now was but a practical necessity then, shaping a city where one misplaced step might land you on an unexpected and unpleasant adventure, like into a horse trough, a comedic mishap no traveler would want. Of course, as you lose yourself in the street's smoky embrace, remember to dodge. The horse-drawn carriage is no mirage, and the indistinct shout of a driver rings out, warning you, "Oi, mind the gap." Historians still argue whether this time truly represented the worst of London's infamous fogs, as some accounts describe days so murky that even midday held the silhouette of night. Yet, quaint or catastrophic, solitariness is the city's hidden charm, as it covers tales from incredulous visitors who were fooled by high heels sinking into trodden mud more often than they'd care to admit. While your senses try to adjust, observe the city dwellers navigating this murky, monochrome world. Ladies drift in and out of the mist like specters, their skirts sweeping the ground with lace-trimmed hems trailing mystery. Their bonnets cast shadows over expressions that mystery novelists could only hope to capture. Gentlemen, meanwhile, stride through the vapor, top hats impervious to drizzle but gleaming with an oil raindrop dance certainly inspired by more than a practical need. In every direction, structures both grand and crumbling paint the backdrop in a perpetual tone of drama, each building whispering secrets of lives lived and lost within. The architecture, darkened by the patina of pollution and time, stands resilient against the weather's whims. They rise as testimonies to the iron and clay heart thrumming beneath the city's surface, an industrial symphony that keeps society on edge, even while obscured in silence. Sneak a glance at the Thames, its broad currents sneak beneath the visibility threshold like a ghostly serpent. Sometimes, it even seems like the river sings, a low ballad harmonizing with the city's grinding rhythm. Maybe there's a reason it's called Old Father Thames, after all. This fog indulges the imagination, doesn't it? Like an atmospheric garnish on the banquet of history we're savoring tonight. Amidst this haze, find the alleyways, those twisting veins off the main arteries where Dickens would have set his most brooding scenes. Perhaps you think of them as the quiet whispers of London's story, where the echo of a lone footstep reverberates as a memory rebounding past centuries. These narrow passages contrast the great boulevards, breathing secrets onto their wandering visitors that aren't meant for the broader thoroughfares. Despite the drab, there's beauty hiding here, should you lean in closely enough. And if you listen, slightly ajar windows leak sounds and smells from lives unfolding within, from the warm aroma of fresh bread wafting from a bakery to the soft coos of a nursemaid soothing her charge's cries. These are the notes of a city's unsung opera, reassuring you that life persists vibrantly in monochrome. So you've braved more than just inclement weather. These foggy streets hide the passage of time like no other, offering glimpses of Victorian pins set patiently in a tapestry that continues to weave history with contemporary life. Now venture onward. The streets stretch before you, ready for your next encounter with the city's enigmatic legends wrapped in a quietness that holds the roar of a bygone era just waiting for your exploration. As you step further, remember this experience the next time you find yourself lost in a fog. You never know when you might stumble into a tale of old London simply shimmering beneath the surface. Trying to make your way through Victorian London is like attempting an extreme obstacle course, only here the hurdles arrive in the form of rather unsavory circumstances. Picture yourself strolling along the cobblestone streets, not quite unlike a Jane Austen character except, alas, without the romantic balls or quite as much witty banter. The air is a heady mix of soot and smoke, clinging to the lungs in a way that makes even today's notorious city smog feel like a gentle wisp. Welcome to a place where the atmosphere is more of a health hazard than a natural phenomenon. As you navigate these teeming streets, you quickly realize just how overcrowded they are. It's as if all of humanity decided to squeeze into this corner of the world, jostling for space with an enthusiasm reserved for a buy one get one free sale. These days, historians still argue whether the sheer density of people was more due to rapid urbanization or a refusal to acknowledge personal space. Either way, any modern-day introvert would be in a perpetual state of panic. Newcomers, like yourself in this imaginative escapade, face all sorts of unexpected hazards. The bustling streets, while alive with activity, are littered, literally and figuratively, with pitfalls. With so many industrious Londoners going about their business, nobody really stops to pick up their mess. Trash overflows from bins that are less practical receptacles and more art installations that scream Victorian avant-garde at its finest. The filth isn't just an eyesore, it's a breeding ground for germs that seem to lay in wait, ever ready to leap onto anyone who dares to pass by. Let's not forget the endless aroma assaulting your senses. The combination of horse manure, industrial pollution, and uncollected garbage is enough to curl even the most stalwart mustache. Remember how we like to claim that using natural products, like crocodile dung sunscreen, is a health risk? Well, existing within this delightful cloud of city air was an exercise in testing your respiratory resilience. After all, Victorian London was nothing if not a stern matronly figure, insisting you breathe deeply and build character. The sky serves as an oppressive canopy, sometimes visible only as a murky haze. It's as if the sun decided that transparency was overrated and opted for the fashion trend of opaque layering. But while you're worried about navigating through this pea soup of pollution without incident, the local pigeons seem to regard it as just another day, dining comfortably on the city's refuse without a care in the world. In such a bustling environment, how does one manage to cross the street? With great difficulty, I assure you. Between dodging carriages that gallop with the abandon of unsupervised toddlers and evading the occasional wandering livestock, each successful crossing feels like the triumph of Perseus over Medusa, an extraordinary feat, minus the petrifying consequences. Or so one hopes. There's a grim understanding that the streets you're traversing now embody a sort of every man for himself ethos. Safety is not guaranteed, with cobras of horse-drawn traffic slithering their way through the throngs. Neville de Villiers, a somewhat madcap inventor from the period, once proposed installing airbags on carriages. Unsurprisingly, the idea failed to gain traction, likely dismissed in a manner both Victorian and haughty, much like things of similar absurdity that pop up today. Looming above all is the unending drone of industry, the beast of progress. Stacks of factories dispense puffs of soot like dragon coughs, contributing to the already suffocating embrace of smog. Historians regularly scratch their heads over why citizens continue to flock to such an uninviting environment. Was it sheer necessity, the allure of fortune, or simply an admirable, albeit misguided, sense of adventure? Amidst the trials of dodging debris and negotiating noxious fumes, there's a strangely admirable aspect to the Victorian Londoner's spirit. They traverse a world that's little more than an ever-shifting hazard course, yet they do so with a stubborn optimism, always looking toward potential triumph over adversity. And this continuous battle is witnessed by the iconic steely gray sky that blankets this city of both dreams and trials. It all looms overhead like an unsolicited yet enduring wardrobe staple, albeit one under constant debate for its style value. But perhaps, as you weave through these streets, you'll find the unexpected joys radiating from brief glimpses of hope and survival, a sense that despite the chaos, life carried on. As you continue your journey, reflect on how even the murkiest corners of history hold lessons for our own time. So next time you apply a deodorant, the formula of which, unlike that crocodile dung sunscreen, won't have you huffing dense clouds of coal dust, remember the Victorian Londoner. They traverse the unpredictable streets with a unique flair, guarded by nothing more than a stout umbrella and a refusal to be bested by circumstance. In a way, perhaps, that determined spirit is worth romanticizing after all. As you wander through the misty vales of Victorian London, your senses, already muddled by the visual obscurity, bristle at a new onslaught: sound. It's an auditory kaleidoscope, where navigating noise becomes a matter of self-preservation. The incessant clatter of horses' hooves echoes on cobblestones, melding harmoniously, or perhaps cacophonously, with the gut punch of factory whistles. The dawn chorus of birds here is more metallic clang and less melodious chirrup. Imagine a car alarm going off, but that alarm is a high-pitched steam whistle reminding you that little Timmy's late for his 12-hour shift. Charming, no? Street vendors contribute enthusiastically to this baffling symphony, each vying for attention like an Instagram influencer at a social media convention. In fact, the famed cries of fresh fish might mislead you to hope for a fresh meal, but alas, your nose promptly informs you otherwise. Historians debate whether these cries were genuine calls to action or simply how business was conducted in the open-air theater that was 19th-century commerce. Perhaps they just like shouting. The footfall of the relentless pedestrian traffic only adds to the discord. As you shoulder your way through the throng, you make out snippets of conversation, a riotous blend of accents and dialects that unite in their resonance, vibrating through the air like a communal seance with noise itself. Each conversation turns into a living history lesson, if only you could pause time to unravel them. Children dart between legs, laughing shrill and unchecked, as street performers try to drown out even the most determined gossipers with the plunk of their instruments. Meanwhile, musical performances, a far cry from today's glam stadium tours, are impromptu sidewalk shows conjured from thin air. True traditions, lost but not forgotten. No discussion of noise in Victorian London would be complete without mentioning the mighty foghorn, even though it's strictly more a maritime sound. Picture this: some say it was an eerie lullaby for Londoners forced awake by rolling mists from the Thames. A quick stroll down the docks and you would feel it reverberate in your bones. The wisdom of the time warned you, if you didn't hear it, you might be swallowed whole by the river's fog. In factories themselves, the clanging of machinery was relentless, a full-time drum solo against the backdrop of British industrial might. Workers found themselves amid the neutron war zone of this revolution, anticipating the next task via the machinery's language of bangs, crashes, and the somewhat reassuring rhythmic thump of progress. Amid this auditory tsunami, whispers of change floated about. Historians still argue whether the increasing machine volume was a prelude to organized labor demands for quieter, and obviously more humane factory practices. The sound of church bells cut through the industrial haze at regular intervals, a rhythm that both regulated life and weathered the noise storm for residents. Each chime synced the city's heartbeat and obligated you to pause, even if merchandise clamored for attention and vendors screamed sales lines at decibels reserved today for rock gigs. Of course, in a world without digital calendars, such audible timekeepers weren't just useful, they were indispensable. And then there's the peculiar fringe note in our orchestra, the screech of gears and steam, the transportation of the future colliding with traditional sounds. The arrival of a train had been celebrated with optimism, a herald of progress, yet it also pushed sound boundaries, introducing decibels that rivaled the raucous atmosphere of a modern rock festival. With passengers, stations filled with families yelling goodbyes, lovers hell-bent on movie-like declarations before departure, and the ever-present puff and scream of the trains themselves, the din was, let's just say, unforgettable. As you trudge through this soundscape, envisioning earplugs as a Victorian invention might seem reasonable. Alas, they didn't exist then. The closest comfort, borrowing wax creation from candle stubs to plug one's ears. It's a fascinating quirk, really, yet registered neither in fashion annals nor practical guides of the time. But maybe we should give credit there anyway. Immersed in this relentless orchestra, you might long for a moment of peace, dreaming of quietude in the modern sense, like the blessed silence of noise-canceling headphones. One tiny pause, if you're lucky enough, involves stepping into a bookstore or library, shelters reverently sacred for your tired eardrums. A hallowed silence blossoming like a gentle whisper, it wraps around you, a luxury amid London's enduring clamor. So, as you push on, plastered with the city's unique sonic legacy, consider the Victorian soundscape as more than noise, a time machine of baffling acoustics and clamor, all harmonizing to create the immense, unyielding metronome of life in historic London. You might even think of the whole affair as an early pitch for surround sound, primitive, spontaneous, and certainly with its own peculiar charm. As you shuffle forward, you may begin to understand why morning tea was practically a necessity then, an acoustic bomb before stepping back into the swirling tempest of sound. As you stroll through the cobblestone streets of Victorian London, the fog lends an ethereal quality to everything around you. It's not just the cold touch of damp air against your skin, it's the sight of chimney sweeps and dark silhouettes and carriages emerging from the mist like apparitions. But as your feet carry you further, the visual poetry gives way to the reality of harsh separations lurking within each street corner. Social classes in Victorian London are more distinct than the line between tea and crumpets. Wealth whispers in grand stone facades with their windows like disapproving eyes, while poverty shouts through the cracks of crumbling brick tenements. You quickly notice there's a social hierarchy as rigid as your Aunt Mildred on a Sunday. It's a world where your address cements your societal status more firmly than any corset could shape a silhouette. The grandiosity of Mayfair or Belgravia, with their tailcoat-clad gentlemen and horse-drawn carriages, sharply contrasts with the cavernous depths of Whitechapel or Bethnal Green, where life for many is a daily battle with grim reality. The social disparity is almost a character in itself, standing silently yet oppressively in every alley and boulevard, reminding you of your place in this Victorian playhouse. Indeed, historians still argue whether the walls dividing the rich from the poor were built of stone or merely of societal indifference. And while the world around you drifts in a measured procession of wealth and poverty, the class distinctions are marked not just by the physical environments, but by the unspoken rules that govern social interactions. For instance, crossing from a poor district to a wealthy one isn't just a matter of following a particular road. You feel as if an invisible barrier keeps shifting in front of you, reinforced by the glances cast your way, like you're in an Agatha Christie novel and everyone knows you're not from around here. For the elite, life is like a never-ending garden party, or so it appears from the outside. Behind the polished doors are parlors full of gaslight and glittering chandeliers, hosting soirees where satin and silk whisper against polished mahogany. These gatherings are more than social events, they are performances where adhering to the subtleties of etiquette, a handshake just so, a turn of phrase like a violin's sweet note, determines one's social standing. Meanwhile, not too far away, you enter the narrow, dimly lit streets where the air is thick with smoke from factories and the hopes bottled within the homes of workers squeezed together like matchsticks in a box. The influence of class is almost sartorial, woven into every thread of the drab garments worn by those who perform the city's labor, making, sweeping, hauling. A primary historical point here, the artisan profession was often romanticized yet riddled with financial instability, with many skilled craftsmen teetering on the edge of poverty. Rank and wealth determine whom you marry, where you reside, and even whose hand you might shake at the occasional crossing of fates. Achieving upward mobility in such a society feels more like folklore than ambition. Some tales of rag to riches fuel hope, like the story of Sarah Churchill who transitioned from a maid to a duchess, although such transitions are few and far between, almost as rare as finding a jackalope. At every turn, there are reminders that, in this era, even leisure is stratified. Parks offer a breath of escapism, but they're also writ large with the presence of class. Well-to-do families glide by in their Sunday best while the less fortunate remain watchful spectators on the periphery. It's not all stiff upper lips and brass buttons, though. There's a certain charm and wit in how Londoners navigate these divides, a nod here, a jest there, that spices the air with human resilience. One fringe tidbit for you, amidst these separations, a peculiar pastime emerged known as slumming, where wealthy citizens would venture into poor districts as a form of entertainment, a controversial practice that sparks debates even today. As you pause in front of the towering walls of a grand estate, you can't help but think that class, in its quiet tyranny, governs the silent walls more effectively than any written law. Could it be that this unyielding structure is a relic of a bygone system poised on the brink of transformation? Or, perhaps it is as enduring as the very stones that pave your path? Hence, historians still engage in hearty debates over whether these class divisions were reinforced, or occasionally threatened, by the very industrial advancements believed to herald social progress. So, as you navigate this intricate social maze, step carefully, dear traveler. You wouldn't want to end up at the wrong soiree, or, heaven forbid, in the wrong communal breadline. In Victorian London, knowing your place is not just a societal dictate but a survival skill, as essential as your wits or your woolen gloves. And remember, if the walls could talk, they'd probably just give you the silent treatment. Picture yourself trudging through the bustling, congested streets of Victorian London. You've been enveloped by the rather damp and chilly hug of the city's notorious weather for some time now. A break from this clamor would be nice, wouldn't it? Well, you may just be in luck. As you meander through the city's maze of narrow alleys and cobbled pathways, you stumble upon a breath of fresh air, or at least that's what the Victorians would have eagerly claimed. Welcome, dear traveler, to the parks and green spaces of 19th century London, those rare patches of tranquility where one can briefly escape the restless hum of urban life. You wander a bit further and find yourself in Hyde Park, one of London's most famous green havens. Legend has it that the air here is fresher, a rare promise in a city otherwise adorned in a constant haze of coal smoke. It's a wonder how anyone found room to breathe within such dreadful filth. Still, whether it was the allure of a rowing adventure across the Serpentine or the chance to partake in a spirited debate at Speaker's Corner, thousands flock to this verdant refuge. Unlike today, when people argue over millennials or Gen Z ruining everything, back then, topics likely ranged from Queen Victoria's latest escapades to whether men should wear mustaches with or sans twirling ends. As you stroll through the park, you might notice something peculiar, the sheer variety of folks from different walks of life mingling here. It's rather contrary to the strict societal order that dictated almost every aspect of Victorian life. Historians still argue whether parks like this genuinely broke down social barriers or merely allowed them to coexist peacefully amid greenery. Nonetheless, it was the perfect place for a genteel promenade in your Sunday best or, if feeling particularly bold, a daring bicycle ride, though do watch out, as cycling attire wasn't the most flexible fashion statement. While Hyde Park was and still is the quintessential London park, Victorians had other choices, such as the meticulously curated Kew Gardens. A splendid botanic treasure trove, Kew offered a dazzling array of flora and a chance to marvel at the now iconic glasshouses. It wasn't all just flower watching and plant pondering. Perhaps, if you were lucky, you'd stumble upon one of the more curious Victorian pastimes, fern collecting. Yes, you heard it right. Collecting ferns. A bit ironic, really, that a society caught up in rapid industrialization was also seized by pteridomania, the Victorian craze for ferns. The esteemed Victorians even went so far as to construct fern houses to showcase their collections. Imagine telling your friends today that ferns were all the rage. For children of the age, parks offered much-needed respite from the realities of life, though not all these realities were the harsh kind. Remember, long before the delights of TikToks and Roblox, entertainment was all classic games like hoop rolling and making mud pies. As you wander deeper into the greenery, you might overhear the high-pitched laughter of Victorian youths engaged in an epic game of Baste the Bear, a centuries-old game involving blindfolds, bravery, and not inconsiderable risk of accidental injury. Despite the potential for a scrape or bruise, the joy of outdoor play was a much-needed break from newsboys shouting headlines about the latest scandal or grimy factory smoke encroaching upon their senses. Yet, not all parks were bustling with laughter or casual debates. Some were solemn spaces reserved for meditation and reflection. Take, for example, the quiet inner gardens found within the walls of outlying churchyards. Though small, these plots sometimes housed memorials dedicated to long-forgotten souls, providing both a curious reminder of mortality and a peaceful setting for contemplation. Say what you will, but juxtaposing public leisure with private mourning was a quintessentially Victorian paradox. Scholars occasionally debate the true purpose behind these parks, wondering if they were merely acts of philanthropy or secret tools for social control. Whatever the motivations, there's one thing we can surely appreciate: a splash of green amid London's grey. As you breathe in the park's slightly fresher air, you can't help but wonder just how wearied city dwellers managed amid all that smoke without gadgets capable of tracking each particle. Perhaps ignorance was bliss, or maybe, just maybe, they trusted their senses a bit too much, similar to that time they thought opium-laced lozenges were an excellent remedy for a sore throat. While shimmying through the perfectly manicured lawns and gravel paths, your attention may be drawn to the public statues that the landscape, effigies celebrating Britain's triumphs and occasional oddities. Some are regal, some are brazenly eccentric. Remember the classic story of acclaimed London mayor, Sir John Cass, whose statue's golden toes spark memes comparing him to Midas, or the tale of a certain duke's statue once crafted without its essential anatomical feature. What a scandalous embarrassment for the sculptor. Such was the life of a Victorian Park visitor. Drama was never really out of reach. And so, as your leisurely jaunt through London's green spaces comes to an end, and you recall the smog-ridden streets beyond, you siphon a welcome dose of tranquility. These parks, with their flora and spirited discussions, floral diversions, and curious pastimes, offered more than mere aesthetics. They were microcosms of societal change. They revealed how even in the strictest societies, a little rebellion in the form of leisure could ignite small doses of progress. Yes, you'd soon be forging back into the coal-smoked chaos just outside these iron gates, but at least you'd face it with lungs freshly kissed by greenery, until, that is, the smog claimed them again. As you saunter through the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, your stomach begins to rumble, a gentle yet persistent reminder of the city's culinary tapestry. Dining here isn't just about quelling hunger, it's a complex dance between class, cuisine, and cleanliness. And, given the era's penchant for the peculiar, it might be more of a waltz with destiny, or dysentery. Picture yourself navigating a bustling street market, with its vendors energetically peddling their wares. The air is thick with the sense of bubbling stews and fresh-baked bread, but also with something less savory, perhaps an ode to wet dog mingling from the leather tanneries nearby. The choices are plenty, but so are the risks. In these markets, you might encounter a hearty meat pie, warm and flaky, on the outside, at least. Historians still argue whether Victorian meat pies contain more meat or mystery, given the era's food safety standards, or lack thereof. For those with a bit more coin, the allure of fine dining beckons from elegantly draped establishments, where live violin music attempts to drown out the din of the outside world. These establishments boast the epitome of sophisticated fare, with menus that showcase elaborate fricassees and glistening aspics. Yet, even among the crystal chandeliers, diners might have harbored quiet suspicions about the day-old status of their oysters, an unwise gamble when refrigeration's closest cousin was the icebox. Of course, if you belong to the teeming working class, dining is an exercise in both creativity and economy. Street vendors offer jellied eels, a Victorian staple sure to challenge both your daring and your digestive resilience. These slithery morsels, served cold in a gelatinous form from eel shops dotting the East End, are a testament to the era's tenacity in confronting food shortages. A quirkier fare you might stumble upon are penny licks, little glass cups filled with a small serving of ice cream, consumed enthusiastically and then handed back, unwashed, for the next customer. It's a bit of cold comfort with a side of Victorian communal spirit and bacteria. And then, there are the drinking houses, pubs and gin palaces, where, after a long day dodging horse-drawn omnibuses and other unseen hazards, one could wet their whistle with a pint of beer. Beer in Victorian England was safer than water, a grim reality that speaks volumes about public sanitation at the time. Gin, disparagingly known as mother's ruin, couldn't have been much safer, yet it provided a temporary escape for many. For those on pennies a day, charity kitchens and free breakfasts offered some solace. Think gruel, soup, or stew, where the exact ingredient list remained suspect at best. These places often became lifelines, serving as meeting points where tales and news were swapped over bread prepared just this side of stale. The concept of the soup kitchen emerged in this era, reflecting a society grappling with inequality. Amidst all this, children, surprisingly, played a central role in the economy of street food vending. Imagine the scene: a child with a basket, hawking freshly caught periwinkles, small edible sea snails, to street corners peppered with potential buyers. While today's child can navigate an iPad like a pro, for Victorian children, hawking these miniature mollusks was a necessary skill for survival. Yet not all was culinary chaos. The middle class, eager to savor a moment of quiet indulgence, might frequent tea shops, a relatively new phenomenon at the time. These establishments offered both a social hub and an escape, with tea importing at its zenith, paving the way for what we now regard as an essential British ritual. Tea itself became symbolic, a subtle act of defiance for some, questioning whether tea consumption challenged the norms of aristocratic wine and spirits, an open debate that perhaps invites you to take sides as you ponder the steaming brew beside china cups and dainty cucumber sandwiches. Despite the presence of dining options galore, the concerns over food adulteration cast a long shadow. The era saw alarmingly creative ways to stretch food supplies: alum for whitening bread and coal tar dyes for fake worm food coloring in candy. Imagine your lollipop with an actual sting. Scandals over these practices occasionally erupted, leading to the beginnings of legislation for food safety. Although how enthusiastically this legislation was enforced is a matter of historical contention. As you journey through the culinary landscape of this fascinating era, it's vital to remember that Victorian dining is as much an adventure as it is a necessity. The nutritional content of the meal was often less of a focus than its sheer abundance. Luxury was more about having your fill than worrying if your bread really did contain sawdust. So, you might do well to keep an open mind and perhaps a nose for the more suspicious cuts of meat. A Victorian dining experience truly is a feast for the senses, not all of which you may wish to engage. As twilight melts into the horizon and the gaslights flicker to life, the cries of fishmongers and barkeeps fade, signaling the end of your dining debut. You tread lightly over cobblestones, perhaps clutching a leftover goose drumstick in wax paper, and wonder how anyone survived the perilous dance of eating, or at least, how they managed to savor anything while navigating this gustatory gauntlet. Still, you think fondly of the chunks of stale bread and that rather dodgy soup, reflecting that, stodgy or sumptuous, Victorian dining taught everyone, rich or poor, that food wasn't just about sustenance, it was about survival. A timeless lesson, indeed, even if you're left with a gentle suspicion of pies. As you wander through the murky haze of Victorian London, you might assume the city's fashion would take a back seat, overshadowed by the more pressing concerns of dodging horse-drawn carriages and avoiding puddles of questionable origin. But in truth, the garments of the era were a fascinating interplay between necessity and style, a battle between practicality and panache dictated by the very environment around them, the fog, the filth, and the incessant need to keep up appearances. Picture yourself navigating the crowded streets, sleeves brushing against petticoats, every layer carefully curated, out of necessity more than anything else. Ladies of the time wore dresses with skirts so voluminous that you wondered if they'd store snacks in there for later. Imagine that, a little sausage roll camouflaged amidst the ruffles and lace, just in case the day's adventures proved too long. These ensembles weren't about making subtle statements, they were a declaration of one's social standing and one's ability to brave the elements with grace. A successful Victorian would tell you, issues of practicality were best solved with a bit of creativity and an abundant amount of fabric. Then there were the men, stoically striding along, their top hats reaching precarious heights, as if constantly prepared for a magic show at a moment's notice. Jackets of dark wool buttoned up against the chill braced them against the elements, the occasional splash of mud serving more as an accessory than an insult. Interestingly, historians still argue whether the top hat was designed more for status or practicality, shielding its wearer from both inclement weather and the judgmental eyes of London society. Meanwhile, amidst the stylistic conformity, the layered attire served a more insidious purpose: protection. The city's infamous smog, a toxic blend of smoke and fog, clung to the clothing. The long, trailing skirts of women's dresses swept through the filthy streets, collecting dirt and grime, but these layers also protected the wearer's skin from the soot that seemed to have an aggressive desire to accessorize every aspect of life. The wealthy might have flaunted silk and lace, but don't mistake opulence for practicality, a quick leap over a suspicious-looking puddle being a high-risk maneuver. For the laborers, meanwhile, practicality was fashion. Their attire was all about durability, with garments tough enough to withstand long hours of relentless work and the ever-present soot settling like an uninvited guest at a dinner party lacking in spontaneity. Speaking of dinner parties, the bourgeois women often donned shawls in vibrant hues, making them stand out a little against the monochrome landscape and stench of industry. These were no ordinary shawls, they doubled as screens, perfect for shielding delicate noses from the less than delicate odors that pervaded London's air, like catching a whiff of that one mysterious dish in a dubious potluck that you're not sure is edible or explosive. The reputation of London's fog was not just rumor, and anywhere its tendrils reached, a shawl was not just an accessory, but a survival tool. Then there's the thing about footwear. Oh, Victorian footwear, the bane of existence endeavoring to wade through the city's detritus. Robust leather boots for both genders shielded feet from filth, but what they didn't protect against were the splinters of daily life, what with their soles wrought from substances better suited for building houses than shoes. Quirky bottom notes to the symphony of practicality, feet trod the perpetual wetness with a grace that was perfected by necessity. Children's clothes echoed this marriage of style and duty. Tiny versions of adult garments clothed the little ones, afloat in swathes of fabric with dresses and trousers that seemed less about comfort and more about survival. Yet, amidst the somber tones of practicality, it's nice to imagine they had hints of youthful rebellion. Some fringe historians even suggest a parental wink at more playful colors beneath the monochrome exterior, practicality nodding to aesthetic ambition. The elite, of course, had the luxury of changing fashions with the tides or whims of Parisian influences, while the lower classes made do, mending tears and patching well-worn dresses like a canvas of frugality. Historians still argue whether the ever-so-popular color black was purely because it could hide the soot stains better, or whether Queen Victoria's perpetual state of mourning for her late husband played a larger role. Opulent or threadbare, Victorian attire was a dance of resourcefulness, each layer of fabric involving some interaction between appearances and necessity. A quirky tidbit? Gloves. People then seemed to have some deep-seated suspicion of bare hands and the germs they might harbor, so gloves were as essential as socks are today. A proper Victorian would no more leave the house without gloves than you would go grocery shopping barefoot, unless you're making a particular point of entering the tabloids. It was about both hygiene and status, a reminder of how accessorizing already had health implications long before the dawn of surgical masks and fashion shows. So, as your eyes begin to droop and the narrative winds its gentle path towards slumber, consider those intrepid Victorian souls trudging along those bustling, fog-filled streets. Each hat, glove, and fold of fabric tells a story of survival, society, and sometimes, just a little bit of showing off, all amidst the swirling mists and the omnipresent muck of life in old London town. Sweet, soot-laden dreams, my stylish wanderer, and may your own wardrobe choices tomorrow be just as considerate of style and survival, with maybe a bit less soot. You find yourself standing on the bustling streets of Victorian London, ready to brave the daily commute. To your left, a horse-drawn omnibus trundles its way through the morning crowd, the driver shouting above the cacophony of hooves and wooden wheels clattering on cobblestones. You climb aboard, squeezing into a seat beside a gentlewoman in a feathered hat that seems intent on occupying more space than one might think possible. You take a deep breath, though the air is tinged with the smell of coal smoke and something you can't quite put your finger on, gingerbread, perhaps, or maybe cabbage. It's hard to tell with everything swirling together in this glorious Victorian potpourri. The sweet relief of sitting is short-lived as you quickly find that comfort is not the modus operandi here. Each jolt of the omnibus is a reminder that these Victorian transport marvels were not designed with modern views on personal space or spinal support in mind. You grip the handle beside you like a lifeline every time the omnibus jolts forward or screeches to avoid the seemingly inevitable collision with some unfortunate pedestrian, threading their way through the ordered chaos. The horse-drawn omnibuses, the Ubers of the Victorian world, might look quaint from the outside, but the frequent stops and starts make you question your life choices, or at least your decision to not simply walk this morning. While the commuters around you handle the ride with the practiced ease of seasoned city dwellers, your own tolerance for this form of transport is notably waning. It gives you some comfort to know that the straight-up horror of your commute wouldn't have been lost on our Victorian counterparts. Politeness might have stopped them from voicing it, but as you occasionally slide across the bench, unbidden, you find yourself strangely bonded with these fellow travelers by shared discomfort. Is it any wonder that many sought out steam-powered trains, despite their own set of failures? These newfangled beauties puffed and chuffed their way through London, connecting people and places at a speed that must have seemed impressively modern. Of course, the innovation came with its own problems. A historian might still debate whether the smoke from the engines was a greater nuisance than the omnibus's more fragrant emissions. There's nothing quite like the aroma of an alien landscape being unveiled one smoky cloud at a time. If the unpredictability of the ride itself wasn't enough, even your wallet isn't exempt from Victorian London's transport shenanigans. Conductors took payments as passengers boarded, a fact which gave astute pickpockets an excellent opportunity to relieve the inattentive of their purse or pocket watch, a risky profession itself when you consider the penalties if caught. As you sway with the rhythm of the road, a random quirk of the steam train era flits through your mind. There were heated debates about the effect of train travel on mental health. Some doctors claimed the speed would make people ill. Railway spine was the term bandied about as a condition similar to whiplash and said to upset one's spiritual equilibrium. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate concern or simply the era's equivalent of that deeply insightful observation, everything causes cancer. Then there's the conductors swiftly maneuvering their way along the narrow aisle, a sort of tightrope act balancing between moving passengers and moving vehicle, who might relieve you of your fare with a gracious nod. It's a skill honed to an art and almost as entertaining as the music hall acts many patrons might be squeezing in some extra pennies to see. Public transport wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, oh no, it was the stage for a spectacular daily drama. Merchants hawking their wares would occasionally hop on, turning the cramped confines of the carriage into an impromptu market, where you might be tempted to buy a handkerchief or a penny dreadful. Gossip traveled faster than the steam engine, and more than a few business deals were probably struck amidst the clatter, in between Jakey the pickpocket and a vendor promising miracle cures for all sorts of intestinal grievances. But even with all these exhilarating few bits that might keep you from flipping open the daily periodical like a portable retreat, it's the simple fact that under all the fog, the dirt, and the pretension of politeness, people just like you were trying to cohabit this magnificent city. Some catching a snooze despite the bone-shaking journey, ingenious, really, that one can sleep while seated on wooden benches. It must have been the forebear of today's folded-up paper pillow nap. And yet, for all its flaws, public transport in Victorian London was a democratizer, a place where the backdrop of steeplechase-worthy commute hurdles mingled the classes, if only for the length of a journey. Young, old, rich, poor, everyone eventually boarded the chaos train, if only because there were few alternatives. The thing was, this rush and crush of communal travel foreshadowed what cities worldwide still grapple with, a constantly evolving interplay between convenience, chaos, and the simple human need to get somewhere else, hopefully with our wallets and sanity intact. And with a great lurch that almost sends you tumbling into the poor gentleman examining yesterday's Times, it's your stop. You uncoil your fingers from their tight embrace of the handle and take a step off the omnibus, feet finding their place once more on the comfort of stationary ground. You breathe in the London air, a victory of old and new sense mingling in a singularly unique embrace, as a splendid symphony of city living performs its morning rendition. Ah, the surprises of public transport. Victorian London knew how to ride you toward a rich tapestry of sensation and narrative, even if the ruts in the road kept threatening to leave you with a unique form of seasickness. Yet, you made it to your destination, conquering another day's new and old commingled beauty. Who knows what Victorian London, or its modes of transport, has in store next? As you navigate the foggy, bustling streets of Victorian London, you can't help but notice how the dim haze lends an air of mystery and intrigue. Yet beneath this romanticized veneer lies a darker truth. Disease and despair form an unholy alliance, preying on the unsuspecting and the vulnerable. Victorian London was essentially a petri dish, a living, breathing experiment in how not to maintain public health. Housing was cramped and unsanitary, sewer systems overflowing with raw waste, and water supplies best described as a bacterial soup on a bad day. Picture this, you're sharing a tenement space with multiple families, each squeezed into tiny, ill-ventilated rooms. The poor ventilation does wonders when it comes to creating the perfect conditions for airborne diseases to thrive. Tuberculosis, or consumption as it was then poetically called, doesn't need an invitation here. It sweeps through crowded areas like it's performing a macabre version of dance fever. Historians still argue whether crushing poverty or the lack of medical knowledge was the most significant culprit. But one thing is certain, TB had a gala time in this setting. Now, if you thought the allure of a quick dip in the Thames might offer a refreshing escape, hold that thought. The river, lovely to gaze upon from a safe distance, was more of an open drain teeming with refuse and something reminiscent of the third plague in the biblical book of Exodus. But at least it was more predictable than Victorian London's drinking water. Stories abound of the cholera epidemics sweeping through densely populated neighborhoods, wreaking havoc on the population. In 1854, Dr. John Snow, no, not the one avenging his cousins in winter, is credited with tracing an outbreak to a single contaminated water pump in Soho. This moment in history marked a significant step forward in understanding how diseases spread, though it's important to remember that not everyone was quick to believe in his radical germ theory. Now, let's dive into the more peculiar side of Victorian health practices. Believe it or not, some Londoners genuinely believed that miasma, bad, smelly air, was the root cause of disease. To combat this, they took measures like hanging pine tree-shaped air fresheners right in their homes. Only kidding, they stuffed herbs into their pockets and wore nosegays, fragrant bouquets, believing these would ward off the sinister miasmas. The quirkiness didn't stop there, though. Leeches were often applied for any ailment under the sun, from headaches to heartaches, probably marking the birth of spa treatments for the brave-hearted. For added excitement, consider the ever-present threat of smallpox. While not unique to London, it found a willing host in the unsanitary conditions of the urban sprawl. The introduction of smallpox vaccination was a debated topic. Some praised it as a medical marvel, scientific advancement at its finest. Others, however, were wary of meeting their maker courtesy of a doctor's needle and opted out whenever possible. Let's remember, living in Victorian London was like taking on the ultimate health challenge without the luxury of a gym membership or access to vitamin supplements. Venturing outside your claustrophobic quarters to take a stroll through the heart of the city, you may find yourself part of a human tapestry that includes a bustling market scene. However, not all produce will encourage a return to this Victorian adventure, as many of the foods sold were, quite literally, rotten to the core. The crux of potential culinary horror stories stemmed from inadequate food preservation, meaning you might accidentally become very well acquainted with botulism if you weren't careful. While many ailments ran rampant through the lesser-monitored populace, perhaps one aspect of the era will cause you to tilt your head and raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether the diet and overall nutrition sufficiently fortified Londoners against illness. This puzzle is most evident in the contradictory dietary habits, many rich in calories, but painfully lacking in essential vitamins and protein. Can you imagine battling scurvy while on land? Sailors at sea would chuckle at the irony. Once the penny dropped, vitamin supplementation began to take form, albeit it took a while to hit its stride. In looking back, we ponder whether the hardships endured bred character or merely reflected a time when survival was the ultimate achievement. Society was on the cusp of major advances in medicine and sanitation, yet relentless poverty and inconsistent knowledge left the city reeling in a perpetual state of catch up and cough up, literally. When the world around you offers streets paved in disease and opportunities for economic and physical despair at every turn, you might understand why a sit-down with Dr. John Snow seemed the more inviting event of the season. London's tribulations exemplify a unique paradox, simultaneous squalor and sophistication, providing a backdrop that challenged its citizens to play the delicate game of Victorian survival. As we ambulate among modern skyscrapers with bottled water and antibacterial gel on our persons, we can appreciate how far society has marched since those fog-cloaked, cholera-ridden days. Let's hope the next great innovation in urban planning doesn't find its genesis at the business end of a tainted pump handle. And if ever there's a moment you feel like grumbling about today's healthcare system or the price of sparkling water, remember that at least you're not sharing a room with consumption incarnate or fighting off the malevolent miasma with a bouquet of daisies. As you navigate the grimy landscapes of Victorian London, let's unravel a tale of toil that makes today's commute feel downright luxurious. You may think a bad day at the office is rough, but imagine trading your ergonomic chair for the insufficient lash of a workhouse cot. Ah, workhouses, where dreams went to curl up in a corner and weep ever so quietly. The concept was simple, if not bleak, a place for the poor to work for their keep, though calling it an opportunity would be akin to labeling a rainstorm a free shower. Workhouses forced men, women, and children alike into arduous labor under the stern gaze of taskmasters whose idea of a motivational speech consisted of grunts and the occasional dismissive shrug. These institutions, meant as a deterrent for poverty, seemed to assume that anyone could pull themselves up by their bootstraps, even if they didn't have boots to begin with. Historians still argue whether the original intent was benevolent reform or masked social control, designed to keep the poor from disturbing the genteel society with their pesky hunger. But let's drift past that quibble for now as we delve deeper into this industrial purgatory. Within these confining walls, laborers moved from task to task in an exhausting, unending loop. Sunrise signaled the start of the workday, and like clockwork, the chimneys belched smoke as if sighing in resignation at the fate of those below. You can already imagine the tasks lined up: stone breaking, oakum picking, sometimes at hours that made farm roosters seem like late sleepers. The echo of clinking chains and the hiss of authority tiptoeing across stone corridors created an eerie soundtrack for life's daily grind. Now, the idea of sitting through the buzz of today's Zoom meetings might seem not so bad, considering that these workers were always under the threat of punishment for underperformance. Yes, even back then, not getting the job done came with its own version of annual performance reviews, albeit with more physical repercussions. Most weeks, appetites lingered unsatisfied thanks to rations that could make cardboard seem a delicacy. Food, just barely passing for nutrition, often came boiled or stewed beyond recognition, each meal a culinary question mark. Quaintly, Victorian society believed in rigorous categorization, a leaking cork spilling into every societal seam. In workhouses, men were separated from women and children from parents, a divide portraying the era's obsession with social order. The concept of family time bonding here might raise an eyebrow higher than a top hat. But don't be fooled, these institutions weren't merely about hard work and bland stews. They also promised to reform the wayward, because nothing corrects misguided behavior quite like consistent dire conditions. You can almost picture Dickensian scenes unfolding as those considered unworthy of other employment were disciplined through labor. While official rhetoric painted workhouses as reformative, whispers often spoke of them as prisons for society's unfortunates. Fancy a day off for a Victorian worker? Think again. Clocking in endless hours was the norm, breaks as rare and mythic as unicorns. Let's not even discuss vacation days, some concepts were apparently too luxurious to dream of. What about factory life, then? A tale of mechanical symphony in grease-stained overalls, yes. At factories, the din of textile looms or the rhythmic clang of ironworks accompanied the sometimes nimble, sometimes sluggish ballet of workers wielding tools with skill and urgency. The Victorian love for industry fueled a boom that sparked simultaneous wonder and dread. Mass production thrived, yet it riveted workers to duties dictated by relentless whistles and metal machines roaring to life like dragons only soothed when sufficiently fed raw materials. Factories painted themselves as the engines driving progress but not without leaving a profound human cost, and there's the rub. Here, safety protocols were often shrugged off as trivial inconveniences. Notices and beady-eyed supervisors warned against accidents, but these were as inevitable as London fog. Historians debate whether the industrialists of yore were visionaries or slaves of profit at humanity's expense. Either way, employees navigated precarious work environments, making every day an acrobatic act of man versus machine, with injuries more common than good humor. To chill you further on this already breezy Victorian day, consider that children were not spared from this harsh milieu. Factories often relied on the small and nimble fingers of young workers to operate delicate equipment or retrieve threads lost amidst clattering looms. The gentle irony of calling this child's play is one for record books, don't you think? Arguments have long turned on whether this was an economic necessity or an exploitative undertaking, further staining an era's moral fabric. Even as candles flickered and the hum of machinery waned with the setting sun, the air inside these establishments always seemed thick with the day's toil and unmet dreams. Upon dismissal, workers shuffled homeward beneath the cloudy skies, wearied eyes capturing and etching the silhouettes of factory domes against the darkening, smoky horizon. These workplaces, entrenched in the Victorian rhetoric of progress and reform, became symbols of class division, but also of endurance against economic tempest. It's a pitch-black tapestry interwoven with strands of human perseverance and stark imbalances, offering you one lingering question: was it worth the sweat and despair to pave the way for future generations? With this, your journey through the unseeable binds of Victorian labor concludes, for now. How about a little respite before diving headlong into the city's offers of entertainment and temporary escape? Perhaps you'll catch a play or indulge in the latest trance-inducing exhibition showcasing the era's curious proclivity for human oddities. Whatever the choice, perhaps take a moment to appreciate that today, the hum of industry is a little more in control, and the notion of a work-life balance doesn't seem so far-fetched. So, sleep tight and dream of horseless carriages you might never have thought possible treading these cobblestones, for in history's deep embrace, anything is plausible. As you meander through the cobbled streets of Victorian London, overwhelmed by the weight of the city's bleakness in your ill-fitting top hat, you might think about how exhausting daily life can be. Amidst the sooty fog and the clamor for survival, you need an escape. Never fear, because fortunately, even in Victorian times, people knew how to have a bit of fun. Yes, it's time to peer through the window of 19th century entertainment and see what pleasures could be found to punctuate the drudgery of the day today. Let's start with the theatre, the beating heart of Victorian entertainment, where the air isn't just thick with anticipation, but quite literally thick with smoke from both the gas lamps and the patrons themselves. Audiences flock to venues like the Royal Opera House or the Globe Theatre. No, not that Globe Theatre. Shakespeare's stomping grounds, unfortunately, crumbled some centuries earlier. Here, you're just as likely to see a rousing tragedy, where tears are practically an unspoken requirement, as you are to see a spectacular comedy with jests that make you chuckle despite the musty conditions. Victorian audiences are a lively bunch, and that's putting it mildly. They participate with a fervor modern theatergoers might find outright disruptive. Anticipate a spontaneous chorus of boos if the act on stage doesn't quite make the cut. And heaven help the villain of the piece, who may require a quick exit lest they be pelted with peanut shells. Historians still argue whether this theatrical participation was out of engagement or the dreariness of life necessitating a bit of mischief indoors. Yet, if sitting around watching someone else prance about doesn't quite thrill you, why not try helping yourself to one of the grand public exhibitions? The Great Exhibition of 1851 is a particularly famous instance, held in the resplendent Crystal Palace, a structure of iron and glass that makes you contemplate how many windows a single exhibit might reasonably need. The exhibition is like a world market on parade. There are exotic animals, technological wonders, and cultural artifacts from every corner of the British Empire. At least that's what the shilling-a-head tickets promise. These events are where middle-class families spend a day, not unlike a modern trip to the plethora of museums that ban smartphones and coffee. Fancy a contraption described as the marvel of the age? Here might be your first glimpse of Isaac Singer's latest sewing machine. No need to mention that sewing garments is not exactly on your afternoon agenda unless you happen to be one of the many seamstresses sweating away in a nearby factory. Nevertheless, the level of invention at these exhibitions is staggering, and one starts to wonder if the Victorian era was one grand spectacle of innovation or merely a precursor to today's gadget-obsessed society. But let's not forget the more unorthodox pursuits. How about a thrilling evening of mesmerism? It's like hypnotism, but if you decorate it with a bit more Victorian flair and a dash of theatrical mystique. Mesmerists, often shrouded in dramatic cloaks, like stage magicians, insist they can control your mind and spirit. People argue both ways on its authenticity, with some folks contemplative of the real forces at play, and others dismissing it as poppycock. Think of it as the original mind-bending Netflix special, a curious blend of wonder and skepticism for the curious and credulous alike. For those who may find such suggestions a bit too interactive, fret not. There's always the option to revel in the strangeness of a public hanging. Indeed, it's a grim spectacle, yet astonishingly enough, it was considered a form of public entertainment. Families would gather at Tyburn, picnic baskets in tow, for an afternoon of morbid curiosity. Morality aside, and oh, what a big aside it is, it was the communal version of Death Comes on Swift Wings, reminding us how public sanctions walked a fine line between decorum and horror. Let's leave this particular spectacle in the past, shall we? Returning to a more genteel night out, you might embrace a masquerade ball. Here's where the societal elite and their hangers-on put on elaborate costumes and masks. This ball isn't just about the waltz or foxtrot, though those are essential. It's about social peacocking or discreetly scandalizing your neighbors. What happens behind the mask stays behind the mask, or so the saying might have gone had they been more aware of Las Vegas in their time. And, if all else fails, there's always the local pub. Step into any alehouse and you're certain to find warmth, both in spirit and in temperature. In Victorian times, the local watering hole was a place to unwind with a pint, exchange the day's tales, or listen to what music could be mustered from the motley collection of hustlers. And being a pub, one imagines there must have been songs to sing, likely amidst considerations of the consequences of the fog lifting or plans to dodge the next chimney-sweeping shift. All these venues of delight paint a picture of a society that knew its own need to find diversions from rampant challenges. Entertainment wasn't just an option, it was a blessing. Each laugh, maybe a rebellion against smog and societal constraint. Every cheer, perhaps a salutation to the brief, unbridled vibrancy of connection between one human and another. And so, with Victorian London's varied pathways of escape, you might find that enduring this lively yet challenging city has less to do with mere survival and more with cherishing the moments where time bucks its heavy yoke, whenever and wherever you might find them. In amidst the swirling fog and the echoing clang of city life, a peculiar tension exists in Victorian London, a curious blend of the forward march of science clashing with whispers of superstition that refuse to be silenced. Picture yourself strolling through those fog-lit streets, where the air itself seems alive with the energy of 1,000 possibilities, and yet, the unknown remains a silent partner. It's an era replete with scientific advancements that promise to shape the future. The Great Exhibition of 1851, held in the iconic Crystal Palace, stands as a dazzling symbol of technological prowess. All manner of ingenious devices and wonderments are on display, from steam-powered contraptions to early forms of machinery that seem to hold the key to an effortless life. Among these wonders, you might find Charles Babbage's difference engine, a mechanical precursor to the modern computer, capturing the imagination of those lucky enough to witness it firsthand. The Victorian mind is ablaze with ideas, new discoveries about electricity, medicine, and the far reaches of earth and sky fueling an optimism for progress. Yet, lurking in the shadows of this luminous parade of science is life's unwavering constant, superstition. A single misstep may lead you into a conversation about phrenology, the science of determining personality based on the shape of one's skull. Imagine a brisk discussion where rational minds meticulously measure head bumps in the name of deeper understanding. It seems these Victorian people dance delicately between enlightened thought and whimsical illusion, like a tightrope walker teasing gravity with each step. This juxtaposition extends into the very fabric of everyday life. The spiritualist movement finds resonance here, offering seances as social events. You sit in a drawing room, hands clasped around a table, as the room's occupants hush to hear ghostly whispers supposedly like Morse code from the beyond. Historians still argue whether London's obsession with spirits provided solace in a time of rapid change, or if it simply exploited grief in a period familiar with loss. Perhaps it's a little bit of both, a testament to how even logical Victorians yearn for the comfort of the unknown to suit the certainty of reality. And let's not forget the medicine men, the charismatic quacks and their tonics promising health if only you'd part with a few pennies more. You might even encounter one extolling the virtues of magnetic healing or the latest infusion that allegedly harnesses the power of electricity in a bottle, lightning in a teacup, if you will. In a world where concrete evidence and complete mystery dine at the same table, can you blame such carnival barkers for their spirited pitches? Meanwhile, legitimate medical advances, like Joseph Lister's antiseptic surgery, are slowly helping to swing the pendulum toward a more scientific understanding of health and illness. Debates rage quietly in parlors and at lecture halls about these newfangled notions that threaten age-old traditions. Perhaps some are tempered by a question of divine intent, a sense of meddling with the natural order. In another life, perhaps you might charm a room with Will Dean wit, whispering how spontaneous human combustion, yes, people of the time debated its reality, is just another form of Victorian multitasking gone awry. But jokes aside, the Victorians straddle the chasm between what is known and what is speculated, forging ahead into modernity with one courteous, and slightly nervous, eye glancing back. Walking alongside you, amid your pensive stroll, you may spot a lamplighter attending to his duty, illuminating gas lamps that, despite their practical purpose, flicker with an almost ephemeral glow. Underneath that soft, casting light, the silhouette of Victorian intellect shines brightly toward the frontiers of knowledge. Ambitious theories emerge from universities, while societies and clubs dedicate their energies to unraveling the mysteries that hang like constellations above London's rainy skies. But it isn't just society's elites who engage with these ideas. In the marketplaces and pubs, amidst the odor of fish and the whispers of ale-touched gossip, even the common folk share stories that blend truth with tale. Tucked somewhere between the words "did you hear," and "they say," you hear anecdotes about newfound creatures emerging from jungles unexplored or fantastical machines capable of flight. These stories are more than mere flights of fancy, they embody the Victorian ethos, defined by limitless possibility shadowed by cautionary skepticism. Hidden within this world of dual beliefs and scientific fervor is an inventive spirit that laid the foundation for many aspects of the modern world. Railways sliced through the countryside, and telegraphs threaded messages across distant lands, all while Victorians maintained a curious relationship with nature, a reminder that for every leap forward, there must always be a keen ear to the ground, listening. So, while you navigate the richly layered streets of Victorian London, flooded with light and shadow alike, remember that binary existence is at the heart of time's passage, where tomorrow's reality is today's impossibility and where the line between truth and tale might be as thin as the next page of a newspaper. As each twilight gives way to night, with lamps now aglow, savor the delicate balance between a thriving reality and a fading past, like watching apparitions emerge from the fog, and let the dance of science and superstition guide you through the echoes of history. Now, as you wander through these fog-laden streets, your gaze settles upon the young faces lightly speckled with dirt, offering you a glimpse into the curious and often grueling lives of Victorian children. Though one might fancy calling this the age of innocence, you'll find that childlike wonder is in short supply, much like hygienic conditions or even an hour of peace and quiet. It's a world where children are not merely spectators of Victorian daily life but active participants, sometimes more industriously than their overworked parents. Picture this: a child, no older than 7, expertly navigating the throng of daily foot traffic. He is not on his way to school with a lunch pail of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Sorry, no PBJs here. Instead, he might be hastily weaving between legs to sell newspapers with a voice that could pierce through the afternoon's haze, shouting the day's sensational headlines. Historians still argue whether these young newsies were entrepreneurs in training or simply part of a nuanced system of labor exploitation that was the norm of the time. But let's not stay stationary for too long in the grim conversational specter of child labor. Imagine now a young girl, gracefully dodging piles of horse dung as adeptly as any adult. By Victorian standards, she might be considered extraordinarily fashion-conscious, clad in layers of hand-me-down attire as colorful and disorganized as a cluttered artist's palette. It's a sign of the times. Children's fashion back then was dictated more by practical necessity than the whims of haute couture. Though adults of the era often longed for the brief tranquility of public parks, Victorian children had their own sanctuaries of leisure. Picture cobblestone streets as playgrounds, where marbles or the crude spinning of hoops handcrafted out of metal would suffice as toys for the day. Despite their ingenuity, one has to wonder how they managed to suppress their noise amidst the cacophony of the city's backdrop without straining the fabric of adult patience. Maybe it's the evolutionary instinct of staying under the radar, quiet yet ubiquitous. As we explore further, it's essential not to overlook the impact of education, or rather, the conspicuous absence of it for many. Schooling in Victorian London wasn't automatically afforded to children, and this is where things get a bit head-scratching by today's standards. While some lucky few trudged to newly established board schools, a large number of others were doomed to the hard-knock life, where learning meant understanding the rough-and-tumble rules of survival. This disparity prompts a modern curiosity that has scholars pondering whether the relentless focus on labor prepared these children for lasting industriousness or blurred the boundaries of their childhood forever. Step into the heart of some ancient factories, and you'll see children not much taller than today's average 4th grader, engaged in tiresome work for wages that couldn't buy a single cup of modern-day artisanal coffee. From dawn till dusk, these small laborers would lend feet and fingers to factories desperate to churn out goods or clean the grimy gears of industrial machinery. A sharpened focus was essential, lest a tiny hand make the wrong move. And yes, parents allowed it, adding another layer of disquiet to this Dickensian tapestry. Still, the wages, meager as they were, offered a comparative bounty for families spiraling in poverty. Now for a parade of the eclectic, the Victorian concept of children wasn't just labor-centric. On rare occasions, they were performers on stage, where their talents were showcased in over-the-top theatrical productions, or as part of traveling exhibitions that doubled as social commentary. It was a mildly grotesque spectacle, leading even the most hardened gentleman to clutch his monocle in disbelief. To explore Victorian London with a nod towards the whimsical, it's essential to mention the occasional dabbling in the fringes of superstition. Ah yes, ever the stalwart, superstition even crept into the upbringing of younglings. While today you might deflate a child's wild stories with a scientific explanation, back then, trading tales of apparitions or dodging the evil eye was as casual as trading marbles. Imagine the young ones casting quizzical glances at shadows and pondering if the flickering gas lamps told ghostly tales of their own. For them, ghost stories weren't just nighttime pastimes, they were accepted as miniature truths in the fabric of life. So, As the spectral fog of the city engulfs the sunset horizon, you might wonder how these little Victorians managed to navigate their rich, complex, and often treacherous lives with so much on their tiny, capable shoulders. Were they heroes, or simply children maneuvering through the maelstrom of their time? In the end, each child's experience was as diverse and multifaceted as the London weather itself. But there's a curious endurance to the child's spirit, making even a day in such a daunting past something of a triumph, or if nothing else, worthy of a tip of our metaphorical hats. As you meander through the labyrinthine streets of Victorian London, you can't help but notice the city is in a state of flux, entwined with an undercurrent of buoyant progress and relentless change. The Industrial Revolution hums along like a well-oiled machine, reshaping not just industries but the very fabric of daily life. Picture this: new inventions pop up like daisies in spring, promising convenience while sometimes offering more chaos than calm. Take the dawn of the railway, for instance. Oh, those audacious iron leviathans plowing through the countryside and rudely asserting themselves in the city. Trains will revolutionize mobility and speed up the pace of daily life to incessant rhythms. Historians still argue whether this newfound acceleration in travel really improved life or just added stress lines to the faces of bustling commuters. But either way, it's a transformative ride. You might find yourself humming along as steam whistles pierce the air, reminding everyone within earshot that progress waits for no one, unless there's a delay due to leaves on the line, Victorian style. While trains expand the city's reach and connect distant neighborhoods, the emergence of gas lighting forever alters the very rhythm of time. The sun no longer dictates London's productivity. The streets, shops, and factories now pulse with life well into the hours previously browed in darkness. This illumination, however, comes with its own set of unintended consequences. Nights in London become both brighter and murkier simultaneously, with the glow creating strange shadows and providing cover for those seeking unsavory deeds under cover of night. You might consider investing in one of those dashing pocket watches being produced in droves. Punctuality never had such importance. And speaking of light, the innovation of photography develops steadily in the populace's collective consciousness. Imagine capturing a slice of time, to be stared at longingly or skeptically depending on the sincerity of the subject smoking a pipe in sepia. It's a quaint concept when it wasn't either terrifying or vexing, with poets no doubt pondering if the camera truly captured your soul. Photography's potential to document Victorian life starts to shift societal norms, breathing new life into both personal keepsakes and public records. The Victorian selfie, if you will, albeit with a lot more waistcoats and far fewer duck faces. But amidst all this progress, technology can also be a fickle friend. Keep in mind the cholera epidemic that swept the city with devastating efficiency, thanks to the faulty underground plumbing and errant sanitation practices of the time. Historians still debate whether London's sewer system, developed under intense duress and prodigious quantities of scandal, acts as a symbol of triumph or tragedy. Public health and technology dance a delicate waltz, occasionally stepping on toes as they swirl through London's crowded life. Architectural marvels stand as towering testimonials to these waves of change, or staggeringly hopeful attempts, eschewing Gothic grandeur in favor of chic, newly minted facades. Accompanying these structural giants might be architectural hiccups, the chimney stack that whistles at the neighbors or the window design, which ensures the rain enters with enthusiasm uninvited. You could admire these 19th century edifices, possibly sneaking peeks at how the other half lives or dreaming of the one day you might afford a quaint home free of structural personality quirks. Now, let's not forget the revolution brewing in the kitchens of London. For those with the fortune to indulge in domesticity rather than survive it, innovations like the gas stove introduce cooking techniques that evoke envy from one's neighbors, assuming one keeps up with explosion hazards, naturally. While dinners across London might gain a measure of reliability, they're also susceptible to bewildering new recipes, some borderline culinary experiments that result in either spontaneous applause or the need to strategically hide failed soufflés. The industrial machine also brings intriguing character to the labor landscape. Infant industries mean more job opportunities, but they also mean longer hours under conditions that today's regulations would scoff at in concerned disbelief. A fickle employment market reflects every bump and advance in the technological roller coaster, providing job security that teeters on precarious edges as industries rise and fall with tumultuous regularity. Think of it as Victorian job hopping, with the added thrill of actually hopping as needed, to dodge the latest machinery addition without a sculpted safety barrier. All in all, the winds of progress blow decidedly through every corner of this sprawling metropolis. Inhabitants of Victorian London must adapt or inevitably be swept away by these waves of change, an era of disparity and opportunity lapping at cobblestones with equal enthusiasm. It's a fervent transition. Their world is burgeoning from a carriage procession to whirlwind urban existence. They carry on, grim practicality mingling with tentative optimism. Turning the streets, you are embraced by these technological wonders and societal shifts, toting them on metaphorical shoulders amid the permanent fog that clings to your overcoat with affectionate dampness. The enduring changes of this period create a spectacular juxtaposition of past traditions meshing with future potentials, drafting a narrative rich in sultry ambition, blending lines of continuity and upheaval. You pause, for just a moment, and listen to the soul of this era, the rhythm of Victorian London, indistinguishably stacked with visceral whispers of vibrant evolution. Amidst this dynamic landscape, one can't help but marvel at both the resilience and creativity demanded by London's evolving tapestry. Some days, surely, offer heady delight, while others fill stomachs with trepidation, far too close an acquaintance with stagnant airs wafting their own narratives between pedestrians. Yet, as you stand there, wrapped in your shawl, standing witness to advances that redefine living itself, you acknowledge the steadfast interplay of progress and challenge, leaving footprints across history's sprawling canvas. With the sun setting on the hazy horizon, you find yourself wandering the bustling banks of the Thames. The river's gentle murmur carries the stories of the city, tales of triumph and tribulation mingling in its historic flow. The air is thick with a peculiar brew, a mix of coal smoke and the day's bustling energy, almost a perfume of survival itself. As the fading light glints off the water, you ponder the day, the intricate dance it required to navigate life in Victorian London. It's a city of contrasts, where ambition and adversity intertwine at every corner. Each step along the river's edge seems to whisper echoes from the past, conversations carried over cobblestones, debates left adrift in time. The Thames serves as both lifeline and mirror, reflecting the ceaseless ebb and flow of city life. In these quiet moments of reflection, you marvel at how society balanced on the precarious edge of revolutionary change and relentless tradition. Historians still argue whether this era in London was a benighted time of shadow or a burgeoning age of light, grappling as it did with the tension between the past and future. There's something oddly comforting in the rhythm of it all, as though the city itself was a living organism, adapting and evolving. The street lamps flicker to life, casting a warm glow over the bustling evening, a glow that highlights still walls, seemingly silent witnesses to daily dramas. The contrasting social classes, with their invisible boundaries, replay before your mind's eye, each neighborhood tantalizingly close yet worlds apart. This rigid hierarchy was no less complex than the lace patterns adorning the dresses of the higher classes, a fact often overlooked by those lost in the grimy whirl of everyday life. And there it is, the quirky tidbit: some fashionistas of the time thought that lace could ward off measles. If only the fabric had been as effective as they hoped. What was merely a mist to the layman appeared through the eyes of the city's thinkers and doers as an opportunity, a chance to sculpt a future, teetering between advancement and chaos. As you meander, the river reflects not just the skyline, but the myriad joys and sorrows stitching together London's identity. It's said that Sherlock Holmes himself, or rather his literary creator Arthur Conan Doyle, took inspiration from these very reflections on the Thames for stories that solved the city's mysteries, both big and small. Despite the city's gritty reality, amidst the laughter of children still ringing from the daytime play and the whistle of the last trains promising to whisk away the weary workers, you detect something soft beneath the surface. The era was it thrummed with unseen vigor, an energy that bore witness to significant transformations, a testament to human resilience, which has led, albeit circuitously, to the comforts of modern life. Yet, the city's transformation, much like its river, was not entirely linear. The tide of change sometimes carried with it unanticipated depths and bends, dragging with it the flotsam and jetsam of missteps and mistakes. As night falls, the narratives become dreamlike. Who really benefited from the industrial boom? Is it the visionary entrepreneurs or the nameless laborers? A question whose resonance lingers even now. It's the kind of scholarly debate that makes one turn to the stars for answers. Could they, too, have wavered over the nighttime river 100 years ago, casting their unwavering gaze upon a city so full of life, so rife with history? But much like trying to discern the origins of Jack the Ripper, a true phantom of the century, the stars offer no ready answers, only distance and, perhaps, perspective. Standing on the edge of the bank, you instinctively glance down at your reflection in the Thames. The visage staring back seems different somehow, as though understanding has marked it in these waning moments. See, that's the thing about Victorian London, it demanded from its people an artful dance with circumstances. The very act of surviving was a skillful maneuver, sidestepping squalor, waltzing past disease, frolicking between social divides. Even the humble bridge you cross tells tales of engineering prowess and human folly, an echo of the time when structures were more than just steel and stone, they were monuments to human idealism. The day fades into a soothing cloak of twilight, a quieter time when the city's rhythms slow, allowing you to unwind. In this gentle lull, you imagine the soft sheets of your cozy bed, as though the fatigue of history has enveloped you in a comforting embrace. Breathe in deeply, the cool night air is fresh and new, possibly the best it's been all day under London's heavy sky. Each step feels softer, each breath slower, tilting you toward restfulness, as if the river itself is whispering you to sleep. Feel the gentle pull of dreams as the symphony of distant echoes plays its final notes. Let the Thames sighing lullabies and mysteries guide you into a quiet reverie, where even the clatter of horse-drawn carriages fades to a soothing murmur. Allow the persistent pulse of the city to blend seamlessly with your own heartbeat, a harmonious rhythm that reassures and calms. Rest easy, knowing that like all those before you, who navigated the glaring challenges and quaint charms this city offered, you've found that delicate balance. The cadence of history has not eroded your spirit but rather enriched your dreams. So drift away with the calming reassurance that tomorrow, though unfathomable, promises its own stories, the comforting whispers of London's ageless river your guide into peaceful slumber.